Does it hurt?
3 words a broke single dad asked a stranger's paralyzed daughter in his rundown Chicago garage. Words her own billionaire mother had never once thought to ask in 11 years. Weeks later, that same mother would be on her knees in front of millions, confessing a secret her own company had buried for 4 years. Stay with me, because the man who asked that question had no idea whose daughter he was really looking at. It started on an ordinary gray October afternoon, in a garage on North Avenue that most of Chicago had never even noticed was there. Jason Hale was 38 years old, and he believed exactly one thing with his whole chest. If he worked hard enough and loved his daughter with everything he had, they would be okay. Didn't matter what the world thought of him. Didn't matter that his boots had a hole starting in the left toe, or that his bank account read $47 until Friday. That belief was the floor he stood on. 3 words were about to knock that floor sideways. Does it hurt? Jason would ask those words, kneeling on cold concrete, to a stranger's daughter, in a garage that smelled like burnt coffee and last winter's motor oil. And those 3 words, spoken by a broke single dad in Wicker Park, Chicago, would end up bringing a billionaire to her knees in front of millions of people. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let me back up. Before we get into this story, I want you to sit with something. Sometimes the smallest people in the room are the ones who change everything. Now, let's start where it started. It was the second week of October, and Chicago had that particular gray chill that gets into your knuckles. Jason's garage sat on North Avenue, a few blocks off Milwaukee. A squat brick building with a hand-painted sign, Hale Auto, that his brother Liam had painted for him 9 years back. The paint was chipping on the H now. Jason kept meaning to touch it up. He never did. Inside, the light came in gray and thin through a window nobody had washed since spring. Jason stood over an open hood, wiping his hands on a rag that had probably been white in a previous life. His hands were rough. Mechanic's hands, scarred knuckles, a thin white line through his left eyebrow from a wrench that slipped in 2019. He was a big man, built from 12 years of lifting engines instead of weights, but there was something careful in the way he moved, like a man who'd learned the hard way that strength without gentleness doesn't mean much. "Dad! Dad, look!" Isabella came barreling through the side door, 7 years old, ponytail crooked, wearing an oversized sweater with a cartoon cat on the front that used to be her aunt's. She was waving a piece of construction paper like a flag. "I drew you a brace," she announced, holding it up. A wobbly stick figure, one leg circled in green marker, and underneath, in crayon block letters, "Help." Jason crouched down to her level, took the paper like it was made of glass. "This for somebody special?" "For whoever needs it." She shrugged like it was obvious. "You always help people who need it." He smiled, tired but real, and tucked the drawing behind the tool bench next to a folded, water-stained receipt he never threw away. On the back of it, in handwriting that wasn't his, were 11 words. "Help people like me. Don't let them lose hope." His brother Liam had written that, 2 years before he died on the Kennedy Expressway, waiting on a surgery that cost $250,000, money that never came in time. Jason had been 29 then, working 2 jobs, watching his brother's kidneys fail in a hospital hallway because the insurance company needed further review. Liam died before Isabella ever took her first breath. Jason dropped out of the University of Illinois Chicago, 3 credits short of a mechanical engineering degree, and started teaching himself biomechanics out of secondhand textbooks and YouTube videos at 2 in the morning, a habit that never really stopped. 2 years later, when his wife Anna died, bringing Isabella into the world, he kept right on studying, rocking his daughter's bassinet with his foot while he read, because grief, he'd learned, needed somewhere to go. So it had been just the 2 of them for 7 years, Jason and his girl, and a garage that ran on hope and duct tape. Isabella set a mug of warm honey milk on the workbench without being asked, the way she'd started doing lately. Like she was the one taking care of him instead of the other way around. Jason's throat tightened a little every time she did that. A 7-year-old shouldn't have to think about whether her father's tired. He just wrapped his hands around the warm mug when a black Rolls-Royce Phantom rolled to a dead stop outside his open bay door, hazards blinking, GPS clearly gone haywire somewhere off I-90. The door opened. A woman stepped out in a white blazer that cost more than his truck, heels clicking on cracked pavement, phone already at her ear, voice sharp with irritation. "I need someone who actually knows what they're doing," she said. Not to Jason, into the phone. Like he wasn't standing right there. Her name was Valentina Lang, CEO of TechMed Corporation, one of the largest medical device manufacturers in the country, though Jason had no way of knowing that yet. Behind her, in the back seat, a 15-year-old girl sat gripping the armrest of her wheelchair, jaw tight, biting back pain she'd clearly been hiding the whole ride. That was Gabriella. Valentina crossed her arms, sizing up the chipped sign, the oil-stained floor, the man in the flannel shirt. Her expression did the math and didn't like the answer. "Is there someone else here? Someone certified?" Jason didn't answer that. He was already walking toward the car, not toward Valentina but past her, down to eye level with her daughter. He noticed the brace first. Custom, expensive, beautifully machined, easily worth more than everything in his garage combined. And wrong. He could see it from 6 feet away, the way the hip hinge sat just slightly off true. He knelt down on the cold concrete in front of a stranger's daughter, the way he'd knelt in front of his own 1,000 times. "Hey," he said quiet. "Does it hurt?" Gabriella's eyes, startled, guarded, then suddenly achingly open, met his. "Every day," she said. "Just a little less some days than others." Valentina stood 2 steps back, arms still crossed, watching this stranger with grease under his fingernails talk to her daughter like he actually wanted to know the answer. Something in her face flickered, suspicion mostly. But underneath it, something else. Something she wasn't ready to name yet. What Valentina didn't know was that Jason had studied a brace almost exactly like this one, alone, at his kitchen table, for the better part of 2 years. And what neither of them knew yet, what only the audience could sense, watching her step out of a car bearing her own company's name on the paperwork in her bag, was that the brace failing her daughter had come from Valentina's own factory floor. This story was only just beginning. Jason didn't ask permission. He just reached for the old caliper on his bench, the one with the worn rubber grip, and the flashlight on his phone, and got to work measuring the hip joint of the brace with the same care he'd give a timing belt that could save somebody's life. 5 minutes. That's all it took him to find it. 10 degrees, he said, half to himself. Your hip hinge is off by about 10 degrees. That's why it's pulling on her lower back every time she takes a step. Valentina blinked. That brace was designed by a team of 6 specialists. Maybe so. Jason didn't look up. But I'd bet none of the 6 of them ever actually watched her walk in it for longer than a fitting appointment. Gabriella made a small sound that might have been a laugh if laughing didn't still hurt her ribs from bracing so hard against pain every day. Isabella had wandered over by then, perched on an overturned milk crate, watching this stranger girl with the same open curiosity she gave everybody. "You want to see my dad's tools?" she asked Gabriella, like this was the most natural thing in the world. Like Billionaire's daughters showed up in her garage every Tuesday. Gabriella actually smiled at that. First real one all day. What none of them said out loud, what Valentina barely let herself think, was that 10 degrees off sounded exactly like a line item she'd once skimmed and initialed on a quarterly risk report without reading closely enough. She pushed the thought down before it could finish forming. She was good at that. She'd had 4 years of practice. It took Jason 2 nights and 1 entire yellow legal pad to sketch Prototype 1. He shaved down the pressure points, re-angled the hinge, patted the parts that had been rubbing Gabriella raw for months. When she tried it on the 3rd day, she stood, hesitated, and then took 2 steps across the garage floor without a single wince. Isabella screamed like her team had won the World Series. Valentina didn't scream. She went very still, hand pressed flat against her own chest, and when she spoke, her voice had lost its edge entirely. "She hasn't walked that smooth since the accident," she said. Then, quieter, almost like she didn't mean to say it out loud, "I was on a Zoom call when it happened, at Indiana Dunes. I was on a call." Nobody in that garage said anything to that. Some things don't need a reply, they just need to be heard. What she didn't say, what she'd spent 4 years not saying, even to herself, was that she recognized this exact flaw. She'd read about a hip hinge misalignment once, buried 3 pages deep in an internal engineering memo she'd signed off on without asking enough questions, back when it was easier to trust her own R&D department than to slow down and check their work. Standing in that garage, watching a stranger fix in 3 days what 6 specialists in 4 years hadn't managed to fix at all, she started to suspect that "I didn't know" wasn't entirely true. Not anymore. The days that followed had a rhythm to them, the good kind of tired. Isabella sat cross-legged on a stack of oil cans, drawing new brace designs in crayon that made no engineering sense at all, but that Jason taped to the wall anyway, right next to the real blueprints. One night, rushing to pack school lunches before the bell, she knocked the cereal box clean off the counter, Fruit Loops skidding across the linoleum in every direction, and Jason just laughed under his breath and swept it up with the side of his boot. Because some mornings, you either laugh or you're late. She rode to school in what she'd nicknamed the Old Dragon, Jason's minivan, older than she was, that groaned like a dying engine every time it climbed the on-ramp, and she loved that van fiercely, the way kids love things that are theirs and nobody else's. Miss Betty, his neighbor from 2 doors down, showed up one evening with a pot of chicken soup still steaming under a dish towel because "a man doing God's work needs to eat something besides gas station coffee, Jason Hale." She sat with him on the porch step afterward, the way she did most evenings, talking about nothing in particular. The price of eggs, whether the Bears had any business calling themselves a football team this year, how Isabella was getting tall. He ate the soup at 11 that night, alone at the workbench, tools spread out around him like a battlefield. And when he was done, he sat there for a long 2 minutes with his head in his hands, crying quietly the way men do when nobody's supposed to be watching, talking under his breath to a photograph of Liam taped inside his toolbox lid. "I'm trying," he told the photo. "I don't know if it's enough, but I'm trying." The garage's old security camera caught all of it, unblinking, the way old cameras do. Nobody watched that footage yet, but it was there, waiting. Prototype 2 wasn't the win Prototype 1 had been. Gabriella walked further, but there was still a hitch in her hip on the 5th or 6th step. A small ache that made her jaw tighten the way it had that first day in the car. Valentina's patience, worn thin by fear she wouldn't say out loud, snapped. "This is reckless," she said, phone already in hand. "I have a legal team. I have actual doctors. What I don't have is a certified reason to let some unlicensed mechanic keep experimenting on my daughter." "Mom," Gabriella's voice was small, but it cut through the garage clean. "He's the first person who's actually tried." Valentina's hand dropped. The phone stayed lit in her palm, forgotten. "Every specialist we've seen," Gabriella went on, "they adjust a strap, tell me it's the best modern medicine can do, and send me an invoice. He's the first one who got down on the floor and watched me walk. That's it. That's all I needed. Somebody to actually watch." Nobody spoke for a moment. Just the hum of the fluorescent light overhead, and somewhere outside, the low, wet hiss of rain starting on North Avenue. Jason decided right then he wasn't sleeping that night. He pulled every ounce of extra weight out of the design he could find. Swapped steel for titanium alloy scraps he'd bartered off a buddy at a scrapyard. Sanded the hip joint down by hand under a desk lamp until 3 in the morning, hand shaking a little from exhaustion by the end of it. Outside, the neon sign from the taqueria across the street bled red and blue light across the wet garage floor. And for a while, it was just him, the rain, and the quiet. There's a particular kind of alone that isn't lonely. That was the kind Jason sat in that night. Word travels fast in a neighborhood that pays attention. Somebody, nobody ever figured out who, had recorded a shaky 10-second clip on their phone of Gabriella taking those first smooth steps in Prototype 1. And it made its way onto a Wicker Park community page by morning. "This mechanic on North Avenue just gave a girl in a wheelchair her steps back," the caption read. "Somebody give this man a medal." By noon, it had 300 comments. By evening, 3,000. People started stopping by the garage just to look through the window, like it was a nativity scene. Miss Betty told anybody who'd listen that she'd known Jason Hale was a good man since the day he fixed her transmission for free and wouldn't take a dime for it. Jason didn't know about any of it yet. He was too busy in the back, elbow deep in Prototype 3, trying to get it right before Gabriella's next visit. He had no idea that somewhere downtown, in a glass building 40 floors up, someone at TechMed Corporation, the very company that had manufactured Gabriella's original brace, the very company whose name was on Valentina's own business card, had just seen that same clip. And they were already making calls. Stay with me, because what happens in that garage next is the moment everything either falls apart or finally starts to heal. She was on a work call the moment her daughter's accident happened. Guilty or not guilty? Drop your verdict below. Yes or no? Prototype 3 felt right from the first step. Gabriella crossed the garage floor. 1, 2, 3, 4 steps. Smooth, steady, her face lifting into something Jason hadn't seen on her yet. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Then, on the 5th step, the hinge caught wrong. It happened fast, the kind of fast that leaves no room to catch anything. Her hip buckled, the brace twisted, and she went down hard onto the concrete, a sharp cry tearing out of her before she could stop it. For one long second, nobody in the garage breathed. Isabella screamed. Jason was already moving, already at Gabriella's side, hands steady even though his heart was slamming. Valentina was faster than either of them expected. She was across the garage in 2 strides, phone already at her ear, voice cracking wide open with panic. "I'm calling the police. I'm calling my lawyers, right now. This is dangerous. This is exactly what I was afraid of." Her panic wasn't really about Jason. It was about one afternoon she could never undo. A Zoom call she hadn't left, a 4-year-old she hadn't been watching closely enough. Calling lawyers felt like control, and control was the only language she'd trusted since the day she learned that love alone hadn't been enough to keep her daughter safe. "Mom!" Gabriella's voice, from the floor, cut through the chaos like a blade. She was breathing hard, wincing, but her eyes were locked on her mother's, clear and certain. "Stop!" Valentina froze, mid-sentence. "All the other doctors gave up," Gabriella said. "Every single one. He's the only one who actually tried." The garage went quiet, except for Gabriella's breathing and the far-off drum of rain against the window. Valentina lowered the phone an inch. Just an inch. But it was enough. It was Jason who broke the silence, gently, helping Gabriella back into her chair with the careful practice of a man who'd done this kind of thing. Steadying someone shaking, someone scared, more times in his life than he wanted to count. "There's someone I want to call," he said quietly. "Someone who might be able to help finish this the right way. A real doctor. Northwestern medicine." Valentina's jaw tightened, but she nodded, still rattled, still holding her daughter's hand like she might disappear if she let go. Jason pulled out his phone and made the call he hadn't made in longer than he wanted to admit. The face that appeared on the cracked screen a moment later belonged to a woman in dark blue scrubs, gray threading through her hair at the temples, exhaustion and warmth living in the same lines around her eyes. Dr. Elena Marsh, Orthopedic Surgery, Northwestern. Anna's older sister. She looked at the screen for a long moment before her expression cracked open. "Jason," her voice wavered. "It's been years." "I know, I'm sorry. I need your eyes on something." Elena's gaze moved past him, to the brace, to the girl in the wheelchair, to the tools scattered across the workbench like a battlefield of careful work. And something in her face softened into recognition, and then grief, and then something like pride. "You're still doing this," she said, not a question. "Still trying to fix what nobody else will touch, just like your wife used to." Valentina, standing at the edge of the frame, went very still. "His wife?" "Anna," Elena said gently. "My sister. She was a biomechanical engineer before Isabella was born. Brilliant. Stubborn. She used to say the whole industry built braces for insurance forms instead of for people." She paused. She started sketching a hip hinge redesign almost exactly like this one, back before she passed. I always wondered if Jason ever finished it. Jason's hands went still on the workbench. He hadn't told anyone that. Not even himself, not really, not in words. But some part of him had known, every night he sat sketching those hinges alone, that he wasn't just building something new. He was finishing something Anna had started and never got the chance to. Elena, still on the screen, cleared her throat and added, almost as an afterthought, "I actually still have some of her old files backed up from when we used to email projects back and forth. Give me 1 second." A minute later, a message notification lit up Jason's phone. An old email thread dated 6 years back, subject line, "Hip hinge idea. Tell me I'm not crazy." Attached, a rough sketch, hand-drawn, in handwriting Jason would have recognized anywhere in the world. He turned the phone screen toward Valentina without a word. She read it again. And then, for the first time since she'd stepped out of that Rolls-Royce in her pristine white blazer, Valentina Lang's composure simply gave out. She didn't cry the polished way rich people cry in boardrooms, single tears, chins held high. She cried the way people cry when something true finally lands. Ugly, full body, both hands pressed over her mouth like she could hold it in, and failed anyway. Right there, in front of her daughter. In front of a stranger. In front of the whole cracked, oil-stained, honest little garage that had somehow become the most important room in her life. "I almost had you shut down," she said, voice breaking. "I almost called the police on the one person who actually—" She couldn't finish it. Gabriella reached over from her wheelchair and took her mother's hand. For a moment, nobody moved. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Rain kept falling outside, streaking the garage's one dirty window, and somewhere in that silence, something between all four of them, Jason, Valentina, Gabriella, and the ghost of a woman none of them could hold on to anymore, finally settled into place. Valentina lowered her phone completely, set it face down on the workbench like she was done needing it. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it in a way she clearly wasn't used to saying things. "For all of it. For how I looked at you the second I got out of that car." Jason didn't need the apology. He'd had a lifetime of people looking at him like that. But he accepted it anyway, quietly, the way he accepted most things, with a small nod and a decision to move forward instead of dwelling. "Let's just get this brace right," he said. "That's all that matters right now." Isabella, who had been unusually quiet for once, hopped up onto the workbench stool and patted Gabriella's hand the way she'd seen her father do 100 times with nervous customers. "You want hot cocoa? We only got the powder kind, but it's pretty good." Gabriella laughed, really laughed, for the first time since she'd stepped out of that car. "I'd love some." Whatever composure Valentina had built over 15 years of boardrooms had cracked open completely in the last 10 minutes. And what came through wasn't the CEO the business press liked to write about. Brilliant, controlled, untouchable. It was just a mother, undone by the discovery that saving her daughter and protecting her company had quietly become two different things somewhere along the way, and she'd spent 4 years choosing the wrong one without ever fully admitting it to herself. Watching her daughter laugh over powdered cocoa in a stranger's garage, she understood, maybe for the first time, which one actually mattered. None of them noticed, in that moment, the small, quiet buzz outside the garage's back window. A shape, hovering low in the rain. Camera lens catching the whole scene through the glass before pulling away into the gray Chicago sky. What none of them knew yet was that it wasn't Valentina who had sent it. 40 floors up, TechMed's chief legal officer had watched the community clip cross 50,000 views that morning and triggered a standing crisis protocol. One Valentina herself had approved years earlier, back when it was just language in a binder, never imagining it would ever be pointed at her own daughter. Nobody had asked her permission. Nobody had needed to. That was the machine she'd built, running exactly as designed, with her no longer fully in control of it. She wouldn't find that out until morning. By then, the drone had already sent everything it needed back to headquarters. The drone just flew away, but TechMed is only getting started. And this time, even Valentina won't see it coming. By the time the sun came up over Milwaukee Avenue, the footage was already everywhere. Someone at TechMed had leaked the drone video overnight, dressed up with a caption designed to do exactly what it did. Unlicensed mechanic puts billionaire's disabled daughter at risk? No context. No mention of 2 smooth, pain-free steps. Just the fall. Gabriella's face twisted in pain, hitting the concrete. Looped over and over. 1 million views climbing toward 2 before breakfast. Jason found out the way most people find out things now. Miss Betty, banging on his garage door at 7 a.m., phone in hand, face pale. Jason, you need to see this." He watched it once. Watched his own hands on that brace. Watched the worst 4 seconds of the whole week edited to look like carelessness instead of care. His stomach dropped somewhere down around his boots. By 9, a courier had delivered a thick envelope to the garage. TechMed's legal team was seeking an emergency injunction to shut the garage's operations down within 18 hours, citing unauthorized modification of a certified medical device, and had already filed a formal complaint with the state licensing board asking them to review Jason's business permit. It wasn't a threat any single company could carry out on its own, but it didn't need to be. A lawsuit like that, filed fast enough and loud enough, could freeze everything Jason had before he ever got a chance to answer it in front of a judge. The garage, the tools, the building his brother had painted the sign for. Everything. Frozen, maybe gone, inside 18 hours. Jason sat down on an overturned bucket in the middle of his own garage and, for the first time since Liam died, felt something close to giving up settle into his chest like cold water. It wasn't the money he was afraid of losing. It was the last room where his brother's paint still lived on a hand-lettered sign, where his late wife's handwriting still sat in an old email he could pull up on his phone. Losing the garage felt like losing the last proof that they had ever existed at all. And for one tired, quiet moment, some small part of him wondered if maybe this was finally the moment he was allowed to stop trying. 40 floors up, Valentina read the same filing on her tablet and felt something closer to horror. Her chief legal officer had signed off on it overnight, exactly the way protocol said he should the moment a viral clip touched company liability. The same protocol she'd approved years ago and never expected to see aimed at the one man who'd just given her daughter her steps back. "Pull it back," she told him, voice flat and cold in a way her staff had learned not to argue with. "Ms. Lang, the board already—" "I said pull it back." They didn't. Not yet. The machine had already started moving, and machines like that don't stop just because the person at the top changes her mind. For the first time in her career, Valentina understood what it felt like to be run over by her own company. That's when Mark Thompson showed up at the garage. Mark was 76, Jason's neighbor from 2 doors down, the kind of man who noticed everything on the block and said nothing about most of it until it mattered. He walked in slow, leaning a little the way he did these days, and set a hand on Jason's shoulder. "I lost my grandson," Mark said quietly, "9 years back. Faulty brace hinge, locked wrong going down a curb, and by the time anybody understood what happened, it was too late. You know whose brace that was?" Jason looked up. "TechMed," Mark said. "Same company sending you that letter. I never told you that before because it wasn't your grief to carry. But it's yours now, whether you want it or not, so you might as well know why I'm standing here." He'd carried that quietly for 9 years. Some grief you carry alone, because saying it out loud makes it real all over again. But he was saying it now, and within the hour, Mark had knocked on every door on the block. By early afternoon, 24 neighbors stood outside Hale Auto with hand-lettered signs, "Save Jason's Kindness Garage." Plates of food nobody asked for, but everybody needed. And a kind of quiet, stubborn solidarity that money can't buy and corporations can't fake. An older woman from the corner store brought a folding table and set up free coffee without being asked. A teenager from the block sat on the curb with a cardboard sign that just said, "Not today, TechMed," and grinned when a passing car honked in agreement. Miss Betty stood in the middle of it all like she was conducting a choir, making sure everybody signed the clipboard she'd printed up that morning. Because if we're going to fight a corporation, we're at least going to be organized about it. Inside, Jason sat in the dim back office, back against the workbench, feeling about as low as he'd felt in a decade. Isabella found him there. She didn't say anything at first, just climbed up next to him and put her small arms around his neck. "Don't give up," she whispered. "I believe in you, like you believed in Uncle Liam." Jason held his daughter for a long minute, throat too tight to answer. Then Isabella did something nobody expected. Not Jason, not Miss Betty, not anybody standing outside with a sign. She picked up the old cracked tablet they kept in the kitchen for watching cartoons, the same tablet she and Jason used most Friday nights, curled up on the worn living room couch, arguing over whether they'd watch the same 3 movies again, and propped it against a stack of tires and pressed record. "Hi," she said, small voice shaking, cat sweater a little crooked, holding up a piece of paper with "Save My Dad's Garage" written in marker. "My dad fixes things. He fixed a girl's leg brace so she could walk again, for free, because that's just who he is. Now a big company wants to close his garage and take everything. Please don't let them." She hit send before Jason even knew what she'd filmed. It moved the way only something true and unpolished can move. Within an hour, people were sharing it. Within 6, it had crossed 1 million views. By the next morning, it had crossed 3. A 7-year-old girl with a crooked ponytail and red, tired eyes, refusing to stop talking even when her voice cracked. It did something the corporate press release never could. People didn't just watch it, they felt it in their chest. Comment sections filled up fast. "This little girl broke me." "Single dad versus a corporation? We already know who's winning this one." "Sign the petition. Share. Do not let this go quiet." A petition appeared before noon. By the next evening, it had 3 million signatures. Miss Betty read every single comment out loud to Jason like scripture, sitting on an overturned bucket beside him, patting his knee between updates. "People see you, Jason Hale," she told him. "Whether you believe it or not, they see you." Jason sat with his elbows on his knees, watching the signature count climb on Miss Betty's phone screen, and felt something strange move through him. Not pride exactly, something closer to disbelief. He'd spent so many years believing that quiet, honest work just had to be its own reward, because nobody was ever going to notice it otherwise. Watching 3 million strangers notice it all at once didn't feel like winning. It felt like finally being seen after a long time of being overlooked. And that, it turned out, was its own kind of ache. Across the city, in a glass office 40 floors above the Loop, Valentina Lang stood at her window with her phone buzzing non-stop against her palm. Board members, lawyers, PR directors, all talking over each other about damage control, about liability, about the stock dip already showing on the morning report. And in her other hand, silent, was a second phone, Gabriella's. A single text message glowing on the screen, sent an hour earlier and unanswered. "Mom, please don't let them do this to him." Valentina stood there a long time, watching the gray Chicago skyline, the weight of an entire company pressing on one side of the scale, and her daughter's voice, small, certain, unwavering, pressing on the other. Everyone downstairs was waiting on her decision. The board, the lawyers, the injunction clock ticking down toward 18 hours. She had built her entire career on choosing the company first. This time, for the first time, she was going to have to choose against the machine she'd spent 15 years building. Valentina had to choose between the empire she built and the daughter who trusted a stranger more than she trusted her. And what she chose next, nobody in that boardroom saw coming. The hearing was held at the Dirksen Federal Building downtown, a federal court session on the safety lawsuit TechMed now faced, high ceilings and hard wooden benches, the kind of room built to make ordinary people feel small. Jason sat at a table that wasn't his world, in a borrowed jacket that didn't quite fit, hands folded the way you hold them when you're trying not to let them shake. Dr. Elena Marsh testified first, calm, precise, a surgeon's steadiness in every word. She walked the room through the hinge design, the biomechanics, the 10 degrees of misalignment that had gone unnoticed by an entire product team, and the redesign that hadn't. When opposing counsel asked her, almost dismissively, whether an unlicensed mechanic was really qualified to catch what 6 specialists had missed, Elena didn't raise her voice. She just said, "He didn't need a license to look. He needed 5 minutes and a reason to actually pay attention. Those turned out to be harder to come by than the license would have been." A few people in the gallery laughed quietly. It wasn't a joke, but it landed like the truth often does. Then Gabriella wheeled herself to the center of the floor, stood, gripped the rail beside her only long enough to find her balance, and walked. 10 full meters, steady, unaided beyond the brace itself, in front of lawyers, reporters, and a gallery gone completely silent. Nobody clapped. The judge, watching over her glasses, didn't even have to call for order. The room simply held its breath together, and by the time Gabriella reached the far rail, half the gallery had tears running down their faces they weren't bothering to wipe away. That's when Valentina stood. She hadn't been asked to speak. She stepped up anyway, smoothing down a blazer that suddenly looked like armor she no longer wanted to wear, and asked the judge for a brief moment as a named party to the case. She could still let the lawyers handle it. That was the version of her that had survived 15 years at the top, the one who never admitted a mistake out loud. But she had just watched her daughter walk 10 unaided meters on nothing but courage. And staying silent now would teach Gabriella the one lesson she never wanted to pass down, that image matters more than truth. That fear, not the lawsuit, not the board, was the one she finally couldn't outrun. "I need to say something on the record," she began, voice steady at first, then less so. 4 years ago, an internal engineering report crossed my desk flagging a hip hinge defect in this exact brace model. I initialed it. I didn't read it closely enough to understand what it meant, because at the time, understanding it would have cost the company more than settling quiet complaints ever did. I made that choice. Every year since, I told myself it was just business. A murmur moved through the gallery. She kept going. "When I first brought my daughter to that garage, I'll admit something uglier than I'm proud of. Part of me recognized this same flaw the moment Jason found it in 5 minutes flat. And part of me thought, if he can fix it for free, off the books, the company never has to answer for 4 years of knowing. I thought I could use his kindness and never pay for it. Her voice cracked. I was wrong about him from the very first minute, and I was wrong about a lot more than that. She turned, found Jason in the front row, and for a second the whole federal courtroom disappeared, and it was just the two of them again, back in that garage, rain on the window. I'm sorry, she said. I nearly destroyed the one honest thing in this whole mess, out of pride and fear. Later that afternoon, in the emptied-out hallway outside the courtroom, Valentina found Jason alone by a water fountain, still in that borrowed jacket. She didn't perform this one for cameras. She simply knelt, right there on the marble floor, the way he had knelt on concrete for her daughter weeks earlier. Thank you, she said, for everything you gave her that I couldn't. Jason helped her back up, the way he helped everyone up. She did the walking, he said. I just built the thing that got out of her way. TechMed's legal team offered him $10 million that same week for full rights to the redesign. A buyout, quiet and clean, with a non-disclosure clause thick as a phone book. Jason turned it down without blinking. Kindness isn't for sale, he told them, and went back to work. Valentina, without telling her board, without telling TechMed's PR division, quietly wired funding through an anonymous foundation to cover the cost of redesigned braces for every family who couldn't afford one. Dozens, then hundreds. When TechMed's board found out, they moved to force her out as CEO. She let them try. For the first time in 15 years, she didn't back down from a fight she believed in more than the company itself. 6 months later, Jason opened the doors of the Jason Kindness Mobility Center, a modest brick building near the Chicago Riverwalk, funded in part by Valentina's foundation, staffed with real engineers and real doctors. Elena among them, 3 days a week, still shaking her head every time she watched Jason work like it was the most natural thing in the world. On opening day, a line of families wrapped halfway around the block before the doors even unlocked. Parents pushing wheelchairs, kids on crutches, a few just there to shake Jason's hand and say thank you for something they'd watched happen on a 15-second clip months earlier. He didn't know most of their names yet. He figured he had time to learn them. But the center ran, at its core, on the same idea that had started it all. Get down on the floor and actually watch the person in front of you. He kept the old garage on North Avenue, too. Every Tuesday night, you could still find him there, sleeves rolled up, fixing somebody's transmission for whatever they could afford. Isabella doing homework on the same milk crate, the chipped Hail Auto sign still hanging above the door. He never did touch up that paint. Some things are worth leaving exactly as they are. But the story wasn't finished yet, because the most powerful moment of all was still waiting, back at the exact place where Gabriella's world had once fallen apart. They went back to Indiana Dunes in the spring, the same shoreline where Gabriella's accident had happened 11 years before, where a 4-year-old girl's whole future had changed course in the space of one wave. The wind off Lake Michigan was cool and salt-clean, whipping Gabriella's long golden-brown hair sideways as she stepped out of the car and onto the sand. She didn't hesitate this time. She ran. Full strides, arms out, laughing loud enough to carry over the wind, all the way down to where the water met the shore. "Uncle Jason!" she shouted back over her shoulder, breathless, grinning wider than any camera could have caught properly. "Thank you for asking if it hurt." Jason stood at the top of the dune with Isabella's small hand in his, watching, throat too tight to trust his own voice. Isabella tugged at his sleeve. Dad, are you crying?" "A little," he admitted. "That's okay," she said, matter of fact the way only a 7-year-old can be. "Uncle Liam would probably cry too." Valentina reached them a second later, and this time there was no blazer, no phone, no boardroom left in her at all. She threw her arms around Jason and cried the way she hadn't let herself cry in years. Not composed, not quiet, just full and open and finally free. "My daughter is walking," she said into his shoulder. "Running. Because of you. I nearly lost my pride and my daughter both chasing the wrong thing, and you gave me both of them back without asking for a single thing in return." She knelt in the sand then, the second time in this story she'd knelt in front of him, though this time it wasn't guilt bringing her down. It was gratitude, plain and whole, the kind that doesn't need an audience to be real. Isabella pulled a folded, water-stained piece of paper from her coat pocket, the same receipt Jason had kept in his wallet for years, Liam's handwriting still faint but legible across the back. "Miss Betty helped me practice reading it," she announced, and cleared her throat with all the seriousness a 7-year-old could summon. "Help people like me. Don't let them lose hope." She looked up at her father. "Uncle Liam knew this would happen," she said. "That kindness would end up helping the same family that hurt the most, right?" Jason didn't have words for that. He just pulled his daughter close and let the wind carry the rest. A little further down the shore, a young boy in a wheelchair sat watching the whole scene with wide eyes. A family friend of one of the center's new patients. Gabriella wheeled over to him, leaned down, and said something quiet, just between the two of them. "Pay it forward, okay?" The boy nodded, solemn as a promise, and Gabriella smiled the way she used to only smile in her sleep. Easy, unguarded, like a girl who'd forgotten she was ever supposed to be careful with her own happiness. 3 weeks later, Valentina stood in front of TechMed's board and resigned as CEO. Not quietly, not with a polished statement written by a PR team, but with the full truth on the record. That she had known about the defect for 4 years and stayed silent. That the company had valued its quarterly numbers over the people wearing its products, and that she was done being part of that math. She redirected a significant share of her personal fortune into funding the Jason Kindness Mobility Center full-time. Within a year, it became a model cited by hospitals and rehabilitation programs in a dozen states, all built on one simple, stubborn idea. Get down, look someone in the eye, and ask if it hurts. Jason still shows up at the old garage on North Avenue every Tuesday night. The sign still says Hail Auto. The H still chipped. Isabella still spills her cereal some mornings rushing out the door. And the old dragon still groans climbing every on-ramp in the city. He likes it that way. Some things are worth leaving exactly as they are. This story reminds us that kindness rarely arrives wrapped in grand gestures. It shows up in 3 words asked honestly. In a mug of hot cocoa handed to a stranger's daughter. In staying 5 minutes longer than you had to. If it's been you on your own for a while now, here's something practical instead of a slogan. Every Sunday evening, before the news comes on, take down the recipe box with his handwriting still on the index cards and cook just one of his dishes, even if it's only for you, standing at the counter. Call the grandchild who never quite has 10 free minutes, and instead of asking how she's doing, ask her to teach you one thing on your phone you've been too proud to ask about. She'll say yes faster than you expect. Once a month, drive to the hardware store he used to disappear into on Saturday mornings, buy one small thing you don't need, and let yourself stand in that aisle as long as you want. Quiet strength was never about carrying on silently. It's choosing one small, specific act of tenderness toward yourself or whoever's still in front of you on an ordinary Tuesday when no one's watching and no camera is rolling. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs the reminder. And stay close, because there's another story just like this one waiting for you next. Behind every viral, tear-jerking script is a human heart that felt pain, hope, and injustice first. AI was merely a helpful assistant in shaping the words so the message of empathy and courage could reach wider audiences.